It is past midnight in Madras, 1935. The city sleeps, but in a cramped office above a noisy printing press, one man is running out of time. Sheets of newsprint thunder out of the machines below, shaking the wooden floor like distant artillery. On a desk cluttered with ink-stained proofs and crumpled bills, a single document lies open. At the bottom, there is a blank line, waiting for a signature that could change the future of Indian journalism. If he signs, he will own a dying newspaper, the Indian Express, and all its debts. If he doesn't, by sunrise the presses will stop, the rival British-owned papers will quietly celebrate, and the idea he has risked everything on will disappear without a sound. The man is small, intense, with restless eyes that seem too large for his thin face. His dhoti is simple, his shirt sweat-stained, but his stare is harder than the metal type downstairs. His name is Ramnath Goenka. In less than 24 hours, he must find the money to keep this paper alive, or watch his greatest rival buy it out and bury it. And this is the moment his entire life has been leading to understand how a boy from a dusty village in Bihar ended up gambling his future against British capital, Indian magnates, and the clock itself. We have to wind the story back, far back, to a place that smelled of jaggery, dust, and wet earth after the monsoon. He was born in 1904 in Baghia in the Darbhanga district. Not in a mansion, not in a palace, but in a modest Marwari trading family that lived in cramped rooms, their wealth measured in sacks, of grain and printed ledgers rather than land or jewels. The world around him was feudal, landlords in silk, peasants barefoot in cracked fields, British officers passing through on horseback, as if everything they saw naturally belonged to them. In that world, little Ramnath was supposed to follow a script already written for him. Learn the accounts, mind the shop, marry early, don't ask questions. But from the beginning, he did not follow the script. He argued. With teachers, with elders, with anyone who tried to tell him this is the way things are. In school, he was small, often sickly, but his stubbornness was legendary. When the village master caned him for speaking back, Ramnath came the next day with the same question, in the same tone, eyes burning. Why? Why is it like this? Why do sahibs in distant cities decide what happens to us? At night, when the oil lamp was turned low to save money, he listened to the hushed voices of the elders. News from Calcutta, from Delhi. Strikes, protests. The name Gandhi, still strange on people's tongues. And always, carried by the railway lines and rumor, there were the newspapers. The Statesman, the Pioneer, the Times of India. Names said with awe or fear because if something reached those pages, the whole country would know. He saw the power before he understood the mechanics. A newspaper was just paper and ink, but it could make a man untouchable or destroy him. It could reduce a massacre to a minor incident or turn a small protest into a national awakening. And in Baghia, the news always came late. Crumpled copies of papers passed from hand to hand, days old, smelling of coal and sweat. On those yellowing sheets, India existed as a distant abstraction, narrated in English by people who did not live in places like Baghia and did not care what happened to them. The gap between the real India and the printed India lodged in his mind like a stone in a shoe. Then, when he was barely a teenager, the first twist came. A fever, the kind that kills children quietly without drama. For days he lay on a woven cot, the mud walls of the room pressing in, his body burning, delirious. In the fog of illness, he saw the same images again and again. Men in crisp coats reading English papers, peasants bent double in flooded rice fields. His own name, not in a school register, but printed in jagged black type at the top of a page. He survived. Many children that season did not. His body grew weaker, but something else hardened. When he stood again, thin as a stick, he no longer wanted the life laid out for him. Death at 12 has a way of making every borrowed custom look ridiculous. He picked his moment. One morning, while the house slept, he packed a small cloth bundle, one change of clothes, a few coins, a piece of stale roti, and he walked, away from Baghia, away from the family shop, towards the nearest station where the world could be entered with a single train ticket. His destination was the roaring, indifferent heart of colonial trade, Calcutta. The boy who stepped onto the platform at Howrah was nobody. He spoke with a Bihari accent, wore the wrong clothes, and had no connections worth mentioning. Calcutta did not care. The city's trams screeched, the docks groaned under the weight of jute and coal. British policemen whistled at coolies who moved too slowly. On Chowringhe, men in top hats stepped into clubs where men like Ramnath were invisible unless serving drinks. But Calcutta had something Baghia never could: opportunity and newspapers by the armful. He found work the way millions did, by standing in lines, carrying loads, saying yes to whatever paid a little. First as a shop apprentice, learning how to balance ledgers swifter than the senior clerks. Then as a small-time broker, running between sellers and buyers, speaking 3 dialects to be understood in 2 streets. The city trained him brutally. You learned to read the flicker in a customer's eyes, to sense when a deal would collapse, to smell which trader was about to go bankrupt before he himself knew it. You did not simply count coins, you read people. And Ramnath was very, very good at reading people. At night, exhausted, he found his way to press districts where the air itself seemed made of ink. He watched the rotary presses spit out bundles of The Statesman and The Englishman, their headlines screaming imperial certainty. On road corners, hawkers shouted in accents from across India, waving newspapers like flags. One image would never leave him: a barefoot child, younger than he had been when he left Baghia, standing under the street lamp, lips moving silently as he tried to read an English headline he could not understand. The paper was there, the words were there, but the power was still out of reach. It was not enough, he thought, for India to have newspapers. India needed newspapers that spoke to Indians, written by Indians, paid for by Indians, answering to no viceroy, no British shareholder, no flattering editor-in-chief in London. For now, that was a dream. Reality was more immediate: rent, food, survival. A twist of fate turned his path south. Business allies, impressed by his relentlessness, offered him a chance in Madras, a city with its own rhythms, its own caste of English, speaking elites, its own universe of politics and print. Madras was not Calcutta. The power clubs were closed, the language impenetrable to a Bihari Marwari boy. But the opportunity was real. Agency work, small trading contracts, a foothold. He took the train again. No one was speaking in the furious, impatient voice Ramnath heard growing on the streets: the non-cooperation movement. Gandhi's Salt March, arrests, Lothi charges. The wrong kind of protester could simply disappear, and the next day some editor at a colonial-friendly paper would write that the situation was under control. From the narrow balcony of his modest room, he watched processions move like rivers through the city. Students with homemade banners, workers in torn shirts, women in white saris. He felt a strange ache. He was not a speaker, not a man for the dais, but he understood numbers, schedules, logistics. He understood how goods, messages, and money moved through a city. It struck him with the force of revelation. A newspaper was not just an idea, it was a supply chain. News in one end, printed pages out the other. Typesetters, reporters, delivery boys, advertisers, presses, ink. Each part vulnerable to pressure, to threats, to money. If the British Raj wielded law and police as weapons, its friends in the press wielded distribution and advertising. A nationalist paper could be strangled quietly. No newsprint, no printer, no ad revenue. You didn't have to arrest an editor if you could starve his presses. By the early 1930s, Ramnath had moved from being merely a trader to someone orbiting the world of print. He secured contracts to supply newsprint and equipment, sat in meetings where editors argued over column width and creditors argued over unpaid bills. He saw intimately how fragile even the loudest newspaper really was. In one smoky office, thick with tension, he watched as an owner slammed a fist on the table. If the British cut our paper quota, we're finished. That sentence never left him. The realization was horrifying and exhilarating at once. The empire's grip on public opinion depended on machinery and money, which meant theoretically it could be broken. It was around this time that his path crossed with a man who would become both partner and adversary. S.E. Sadanand. Sadanand was a fiery, idealistic journalist from Bombay, founder of the Free Press Journal, a nationalist daily that gave space to voices the British establishment preferred to ignore. He had guts, energy, and a vision of an all-India news service that would break the monopoly of imperial agencies like Reuters. Ramnath had something Sadanand did not: a ruthless, almost mechanical understanding of business. Their alliance was inevitable and combustible. In Madras, Sadanand had acquired a struggling newspaper, the Indian Express, from its founder P. Varadarajulu Naidu. The paper was small, the finances shaky, but its name carried a promise: fast, fearless Indian. To keep it alive, Sadhana needed money, networks, and a man who could navigate the hostile commercial environment of Madras. He turned to Ramnath. For Ramnath, this was not just a business opportunity. This was the door he had sensed for years, now standing half open. A real paper, real presses, a real platform from which to challenge the big colonial outfits and, eventually, even the cautious Indian grandees. But there was a problem, a big one. He was entering a battlefield already occupied by veteran warriors. There was the British-owned Mail Group, with decades of experience, deep pockets, and the eager support of the colonial administration. There was the Hindu, austere and secure, its managers regarding upstarts with the same expression they reserved for noisy street vendors. And there were the local business houses who did not see why a newcomer from Bihar should be allowed to disturb their comfortable arrangements with either the British or the rising Congress politicians. In the corridors of Madras clubs, his name was spoken with a smirk. Who is this Goenka fellow? A Marwari trader, nothing more. He'll learn his place. One man in particular watched him closely, a powerful agent of the British-owned press in Madras, who controlled a significant slice of advertising. For him, every rupee that went to the Indian Express was a rupee taken from his stable of loyal pro-establishment papers. He did not intend to lose. He became, in practice if not in name, Ramnath's first true competitor. The first skirmishes were fought not with ink, but with invoices. An advertiser who promised a half-page in the Indian Express would receive a quiet visit in the evening. There would be talk of stability, of reach, of tried and tested readership. And somewhere in that conversation, a threat, never quite spoken. Do you really want to anger the newspapers the government reads? More than once, a promised ad vanished overnight. More than once, a printer suddenly had no capacity for a small nationalist-leaning daily. Each time, Ramnath took notes. Names, numbers, times. He did not rant. He calculated. He invested his own limited money into the paper, shoring up its operations. He begged, he negotiated, he promised impossible returns. He cut his own expenses to the bone, living in conditions not much better than his office peons. While other businessmen in Madras attended soirée, he sat on the press room floor, sleeves rolled up, learning how the machines worked. But passion, frugality, and stubbornness could not change one brutal fact. The Indian Express was bleeding money. Sadanand, overstretched and idealistic, had other battles to fight in Bombay. Creditors circled. The British-friendly rival in Madras quietly marked dates on a calendar. If this noisy little paper disappeared, no one important would complain. And that is how we returned to the night we began with. The air in the office is heavy, thick with heat and tension. A kerosene lamp flickers on the table. The electricity bill is overdue. Outside, the city is dark, but inside, the presses still rumble, turning blank rolls into front pages that may never see the light of morning. On the desk, that document. A transfer of ownership. If Ramnath signs, the Indian Express will be his. Completely, so will its debts, its tangled contracts, its angry creditors, and the quiet hostility of every established newspaper in Madras. If he fails to pay within the next day, the paper will likely be broken up, its assets sold for scrap, its name tossed into the corner of history where failed ventures go to die. His rival has already made informal offers to the creditors. Let the upstart fail, he has told them, and we will take over the assets cheaply. No fuss, no mess. After all, why should Madras need another daily, especially one that asks uncomfortable questions? The clock ticks. Ink dries on pages that may never be read. Ramnath looks at the transfer paper, his mind racing, not with the fear of bankruptcy. He has known poverty, but with something deeper, more urgent. If he walks away now, he will go back to being just another trader, another anonymous figure in the bazaar. The newspapers will continue to lie, to distort, to ignore. The barefoot boy under the street lamp in Calcutta will remain forever outside the magic circle of those who decide what India is and what it is allowed to know. But if he takes the leap, he will be pitting not just his money but his very existence against a structure built over a century. British capital, compliant Indian elites, and a press culture designed to comfort the powerful. He has less than 24 hours to find the funds. His competitor has years of experience, entrenched influence, and the quiet blessing of the authorities. The unequal fight excites him. It terrifies him. It feels in some irrational way inevitable. He takes the pen. The nib scratches the paper. The ink shines wetly in the dim light like fresh blood. Ramnath Goenka signs. In that moment, nothing changes in the streets of Madras. The trams still rattle. The British officers still dine at their clubs. The competitors still sleep confidently, sure that by this time tomorrow the Express will be reduced to a cautionary tale about overreaching Marwari traders. But something has shifted. For the first time, the boy from Baghia is no longer standing outside the world of newspapers, staring in. He is inside the machine now, trapped with it, fighting against time, money, and men who would rather silence him than compete on equal terms. He folds the paper calmly, hands it back, and rises. The presses below his feet shudder. The night is almost over. The race against his rival, against bankruptcy, and against the colonial structure of power that has ruled the printed word in India has truly begun. By dawn, Madras is expecting a funeral. The word has gone around the press district. By morning, the Indian Express will be finished. Creditors are ready. Rivals are ready. The British advertising agent who has been quietly strangling the paper's revenue is more than ready. He has already drafted a smug little note for his London principals. The experiment has collapsed. The Marwari overreached. And then, as the first milk vendors clatter through the streets, something impossible happens. Bundles of the Indian Express slam onto tea stalls and street corners. The dying paper is very much alive. The men who come to collect unpaid bills stop in their tracks when they see the fresh ink. The compositors downstairs, who had been rehearsing speeches about unpaid wages, stare at the stacks of printed pages like they're seeing a ghost. The rival agent, standing on his balcony as the city wakes, watches a barefoot boy run past, waving the new edition. For a few stunned seconds, he forgets to breathe. Because what no one in Madras knows, not yet, is what happened in those hours between signature and sunrise. When Ramnath Goenka walked out of the office with the transfer document in his pocket, he did not go home. He did not sleep. He began to run. There was a brutal, simple fact printed in his brain in letters larger than any headline. He had less than 24 hours to raise money. If even one of the major creditors filed in court the next day, a judge could freeze the assets. The presses could be locked. His competitor could quietly scoop up the machinery and the title. The paper would still die. Only now it would die with his name attached. He moved through Madras like a man racing a fuse. From Georgetown to Mylapore, he knocked on doors. Not of aristocrats sipping whiskey in colonial clubs. They would not risk upsetting their British friends. But of merchants, moneylenders. Small businessmen who remembered what it felt like to be dismissed by men with accents. Some laughed in his face. Newspaper, in this climate? The British will sit on you. The big houses will starve you. Invest in cotton, Goenka, not in trouble. Some were kinder but no less firm. We admire your courage. We cannot afford your enemies. But there were others. A cloth merchant whose son was in jail for joining a protest. A shipping broker furious that his British principals treated him like a glorified clerk. A Marwari trader who had once watched Ramnath argue prices all afternoon and finally grudgingly respect him for not blinking. He did not offer them a dream of profit. He offered them a weapon. Today they write what they like about us, he said, voice hoarse from talking, eyes bright with exhaustion. Tomorrow, if we survive, this paper will write what we like about them. He scraped together just enough. Notes in cloth bags, coins wrapped in newspaper, handshakes that were almost oaths. Then he went to the most reluctant group of all, the staff of the Express itself. You know the accounts, he told the compositors, the clerks, the delivery boys crammed into the overheated room. You know we are drowning. I am asking you to stay on the ship. I cannot promise salaries on time. I can only promise that if we make it past this month, past this year, this paper will belong as much to you as to me. There was a silence thick enough to taste. Someone coughed. Someone cursed softly. And then an old proofreader with ink permanently under his nails said, I'm too tired to find a new job. I will die here. That broke the tension. There was laughter, nervous but real. A compositor stepped forward. How late will we work, Sahib? Until the last man standing falls, Ramnath said. They worked through the night. On the other side of the city, in a well-lit office with polished floors, his rival finally heard the news. Goenka had found the money. The creditors, enticed by higher interest and charmed by his sheer audacity, had postponed action. The presses would not be seized. Not today. For the first time, the British agent felt something unsettling, not contempt, not irritation, interest. This Marwari was not going away. The next months were a war of attrition played out in invoices and gossip columns. Every advertiser who dared take a small slot in the Indian Express received a quiet visit. Every rumor about the paper's finances was amplified over evening drinks at the club. He signed away his life, I hear. Just a trader playing at politics. One bad monsoon and he's finished. Ramnath answered not with statements, but with stamina. He cut the paper's luxuries until it was leaner than any rival. No fancy offices, no gentleman editors with astronomical salaries. He bought second-hand machinery, bargained savagely for ink, reused anything that could still take a print. He moved into a small room so close to the presses that the floor trembled under his sleeping mat. When the night shift broke for tea at 2A, MEO, more than once they found him already awake, running his fingers over the next day's front page, checking, always checking. But he did something more radical than thrift. He changed the way the paper sounded. While the established dailies printed careful distance-keeping reports on protests, a minor disturbance, a regrettable incident, the Indian Express began to write like it was in the crowd. Students beaten in Triplicane, a headline shouted. Police fire without warning in Salem, another accused. He printed letters from mill workers, from small traders, from clerks who signed their names in shaky English. He gave space to the underpaid, the unheard. The language was not polished. Sometimes the grammar limped, but the anger was precise. Readers noticed. A fisherman in Royapuram who had never before given a paisa to a newspaper began buying the Express because it wrote about an eviction case in his slum. A schoolteacher in a small town outside Madras pinned a clipping to the wall, a blistering editorial demanding why Indian soldiers were sent to die in distant imperial wars without a voice in their own country's freedom. Circulation climbed, painfully, unevenly, but undeniably. His competitor, watching the numbers, understood something dangerous. This was no longer just a commercial irritant. This was a political problem. So the war shifted to a different battlefield, newsprint. The British Raj controlled import licenses for paper. Without those long rolls of white, even the bravest editor was reduced to scribbling on scraps. Suddenly, the Indian Express found its applications misplaced, its quotas under review. A ship carrying a consignment of newsprint for the paper was delayed in port for reasons no official could quite explain. Ramnath saw the invisible handprints everywhere. He reacted the only way he knew, doubling down. He traveled to Delhi, a cramped suitcase in hand, to haunt the corridors of power. In stale government offices with slow-moving fans, he waited outside bureaucrats' doors, refused to be shrugged away by clerks. "You are wasting your time," one senior officer told him almost kindly. "Support the war effort, write calmer pieces, and perhaps your troubles will lessen." He went back to Madras and the next week ran an editorial that could only be read as a raised fist. "This paper will not trade its conscience for a quota of paper," it thundered. "If we must reduce our size, we will. If we must print on cheaper stock, we will. But we will not turn our face away from the truth." His rival read it, then wrote a short note in his diary. "He is either a fool or something worse, a man who does not know when to stop." History was about to remove the luxury of stopping. War came. With the outbreak of World War II, Madras found itself under blackout curtains and air raid drills. Sirens wailed, sandbags piled up around colonial buildings. The same British Empire that had scorned Indian opinion now needed Indian soldiers, Indian taxes, Indian factories. The censorship machinery tightened like a noose. Columns came back from the censor's office with whole paragraphs blacked out, leaving white scars on the page. Papers that wished to be responsible quietly stopped asking inconvenient questions. Why were Indians fighting for freedoms abroad that they still did not possess at home? Why were grain prices soaring while warehouses held reserves? The Indian Express pushed, pulled, tested the boundaries. One night, a censor called personally. "This front page will not go, Goenka," he said, voice clipped. "You have 1 hour to remove the report on the strike, or your paper will be seized under the Defense of India rules." 1 hour. The presses were already inked. Delivery boys waited at the doors. To kill the story meant throwing away an entire run, losing money he did not have, teaching his staff that the first crack of the whip was enough. To defy the order meant risking closure, not in some distant future, but that very night. He stood in the composing room, the metal type glinting under bare bulbs, the air hot and metallic. His nearest rival, he knew, would love nothing more than to print an extra edition tomorrow. Reckless sheet shut down, warning to all irresponsible voices. The men in the room watched him. This was not an abstract decision on principle. It was wages, rent, school fees, food. "Take out the adjectives," he said finally, voice steady. "Leave the facts." It was a razor's edge compromise. The strike stayed, but its description was stripped of any language the censors could call inflammatory. The headline shrank, became colder, more clinical. The paper came out. The presses were not seized. The censor, irritated but unwilling to start a war over a few toned-down sentences, let it pass. Ramnath went home, lay down on his trembling floor, and stared at the ceiling, feeling neither victory nor defeat, only a mounting understanding of the game he had chosen to play. He was not only fighting one rival in Madras, he was dancing with an empire that preferred its partners obedient. Yet in those same war years, something else happened, something that shifted the balance of power in a way no censor could fully control. The hunger for unvarnished news exploded. Blackout, rationing, rumors of Japanese bombers, it all made people desperate for information they could trust. In dimly lit lanes, men huddled around a single copy of a paper, whispering. The Hindu remained precise, measured. The British dailies tried to be upbeat. But it was the Indian Express that printed in stark language the grievances no one else would voice. Corruption in ration shops, brutalities at recruitment camps, small stories that, taken together, drew a map of a country tired of being handled like a resource, not a people. Ramnath understood something vital. A paper's true owner was not the man whose name sat on the legal documents. It was the crowd that read it. He began to expand. First, he pushed deeper into the Madras presidency, sending correspondents to Telugu-speaking regions, to small coastal towns where the only news had come for decades in the voice of some distant English editor. When Andhra Prabha was launched as a Telugu daily under his umbrella, many old hands in the trade snorted. How will this Marwari manage a Telugu paper? He managed the way he always did, by finding people who knew what he did not, and then backing them to the hilt. Local editors, local reporters, local concerns, but behind them his ferocious insistence on independence. While his Madras rival polished English editorials about empire and duty, Ramnath's group was printing in multiple languages, speaking into drawing rooms and thatched huts alike. By the time the war ended and the tide of history turned, he was no longer the awkward outsider. He was something else, a threat. The British were leaving. Power was about to mutate, not vanish. In the winter of 1946, as negotiations over independence twisted and stalled, as communal fires burned, the battleground of the press shifted yet again. Now it wasn't only colonial officials who watched his pages nervously. It was Congress leaders, rising regional bosses, ministers in waiting. Many of them were his friends. He had supported the freedom movement, opened his pages to their speeches, endured pressure and financial risks because he believed in the cause. But he had never even once believed that a free India meant a tamed press. In smoky rooms in Bombay and Delhi, he listened as powerful men spoke of the future. Now that we will no longer have to fear British censorship, one senior congressman laughed. Our papers will finally be free. Ramnath smiled thinly. Free of the British, he thought. But free of you? As independence came, as the Union Jack fell and the tricolour rose, India erupted in celebration. The very presses that had once carried notices of British martial law now printed poems of freedom, portraits of leaders, maps of a new nation. For the Indian Express, it was a moment of genuine joy and of subtle repositioning. Overnight, the calculus of rivalry changed. The British-owned papers that had once sneered at him were suddenly orphans, their white masters packing trunks. Some would wither, some would be bought out. The smooth English agent who had tried to cut off his ad revenues found himself reduced to representing a fading past. But other competitors were rising, more dangerous because they wore khadi, not Savile Row suits. Party papers, openly loyal to Congress factions. Regional dailies aligned to powerful chief ministers. English dailies whose owners attended the same receptions as cabinet ministers, toasted the same victories, shared the same assumptions, that now the nation had been won, it was time to manage it, not argue with it. Ramnath stepped into this shifting landscape with a clarity that startled even his own staff. "We supported the struggle," he told his editors, "because we wanted the British to go. That does not mean we now work for those who sit in their chairs." She, his old rival in Madras, now dependent on goodwill from the very political leaders who liked Ramnath's stubbornness less and less, watched in a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. This man, who had once scrambled for every scrap of advert revenue, was now being invited to Delhi for consultations, his views on press freedom sought, his paper quoted in Parliament. He had, in the space of a decade and a half, done something almost no one in the club-bound world of Indian journalism thought possible. He had built power without bending the knee. But power, for Ramnath Goenka, was never just positions on committees or polite invitations. It was reach. It was the ability to send his version of events, his version of India, from one end of the country to the other before his competitors even woke up. He set his eyes on Bombay, the country's financial nerve center, and on Delhi, the new capital where laws would be written and newspapers courted or punished. It was an insane ambition for a man whose balance sheet still creaked, whose group was held together by willpower and the exhausted loyalty of staff who knew what it meant to wait months for arrears. His own health was beginning to betray him too. The childhood fevers he had outrun caught up as stubborn aches and sudden collapses. But each time, as soon as he could stand, he was back in railway compartments, in boardrooms, in dingy press rooms, selling one thing: the idea of a truly national, truly independent Indian newspaper. Deals were struck, loans taken, partnerships formed, some solid, some treacherous. In one particularly tense negotiation over acquiring a Bombay title, a prospective partner leaned in and said, half joking, half serious, "Goenka ji, newspapers have ruined many men. Why do you chase them as if you have a death wish?" Ramnath laughed, a short, hard sound. "Because one day," he said, "a prime minister will fear my front page more than any opposition speech." The man thought he was bluffing. History would prove otherwise. By the early 1950s, the name Indian Express no longer meant just a stubborn little paper in Madras. It meant a growing chain, a network of voices, a challenge to every comfortable monopoly, from the old British houses to the new Indian barons of the press, the boy from Baghia, the broker from Calcutta, the outsider who once stood in the street inhaling the smell of newspapers he could not influence had forced his way to the table where narratives were made. And as the young republic settled uneasily into power, as new men in starched white rose to heights the British viceroys had once occupied, Ramnath Goenka looked at them with the same question in his eyes he had once turned on colonial officers, landlords, and rival agents. Who will tell you no? He knew now that he could. What he did not yet know, what no one in India yet knew, was how far he would one day go to prove it, and how bitter, how personal, the war between a newspaper owner and a prime minister of India could become. On the day Jawaharlal Nehru dies, the presses of the Indian Express in Delhi are shaking the ground, but in Ramnath Goenka's office, there is an eerie ringing silence. Telephones are exploding across the city. Editors summoned to radio studios, proprietors called to draft tributes, publishers offered exclusive photographs from government archives. The greatest prime minister India has ever known is gone, and the new India is already being written in memorial ink. But Ramnath waits for a call that never comes. No minister phones to coordinate coverage. No secretary suggests a preferred photograph, a particular quotation, an appropriate headline size. A rival proprietor, a suave North Indian magnate whose chain has grown fat on government advertising, calls instead. "Delhi is watching your front page, Goenka ji," he says lightly. "Don't slip. This is not a day to be adventurous." Ramnath looks at the untouched telephone on his desk and smiles, slow and hard. "That," he says, "is exactly what makes it a dangerous day. Because this is the moment the real test begins, not of loyalty to a dead leader, but of independence from the living ones who will rush to fill the vacuum. Nehru is gone. The Republic is entering uncharted territory. And in that unstable hour, when every major paper is instinctively edging closer to power, Ramnath Goenka pushes his farther away. He has spent 20 years clawing his way from the alleyways of Madras to the corridors of Delhi, cutting deals in train compartments, mortgaging his own future to buy printing presses heavier than anything he could lift. He has fought foreign advertising agents, stingy bankers, and a colonial state that treated dissent as treachery. Now he is about to discover that fighting his own people may be harder. The 1950s and early 1960s are Ramnath's age of conquest. He moves on Delhi like a general advancing on a capital city. Securing a proper foothold in the new political heart of India is not a romantic dream. It is a cold calculation. Whoever owns Delhi's morning will own the narrative that ministers read over tea, the questions civil servants fear, the mood foreign, embassies sense when they skim the editorials. But Delhi is already someone's fortress. The biggest English daily in the capital, rich and impeccably connected, treats the city as a private estate. Its proprietor dines with ministers, hosts receptions where policy is whispered over cut glass. Its editorials are sharp when safe, gentle when it matters. Behind the polite smiles, he and Ramnath are at war. It is not the kind of war that makes banners and ballads. It is fought in advertising contracts and railway bookings, in who gets government notifications first, whose reporters are tipped off about a cabinet reshuffle, whose editor is invited to off-the-record briefings with the Prime Minister. Ramnath knows he will not win by being respectable. Respectability is already taken. He will win by being indispensable. So he does what he always does. He bets the company. He pours money he does not have into a Delhi edition, into reporters who will not bow their heads, into a distribution network that flings the Indian Express into government colonies and crowded bazaars with the same ruthless ambition. One evening, as the sun bleeds over Raisina Hill, he stands on the balcony of the New Delhi office and watches the city lights flicker on. From here, he can almost see the South Block windows where decisions about wars and reforms will be made. He knows that inside those rooms, men in Nehru jackets are used to reading newspapers that flatter them. He intends to put a different kind of paper on their breakfast trays. His chance arrives sooner than he expects, wrapped in a beige file and sealed with bureaucratic arrogance. It is the late 1950s. An insurance swindle is brewing, quietly, efficiently, inside the newly nationalized Life Insurance Corporation of India. A businessman named Haridas Mundra is using political protection and financial tricks to siphon public money through questionable share purchases. On paper, it is an accounting matter, nothing that should disturb a prime minister. But in the hands of a restless MP named Feroz Gandhi, it becomes dynamite. Feroz, the son-in-law of Nehru but no one's pet, senses the scandal's power. Public money, political pressure, secret deals. It is everything a democracy claims to oppose. He needs a platform that will not be cowed by the fact that the blast radius of this story may reach the Prime Minister's own office. He turns to the Indian Express. When the first reports run, they are technical, dense with numbers and names that mean little to the ordinary reader. But behind those dry columns, Ramnath smells blood. He pushes his reporters harder. "Show me where the money moves," he tells them. "Show me who signs what. If someone in Delhi is protecting this man, I want to see the fingerprints." The rival Delhi paper, comfortable in its ties to the establishment, treads carefully, treating the scandal as just another parliamentary squall. The Indian Express does not. It prints charts. It prints names. It prints the uncomfortable question, if public money can be gambled away in daylight like this, what does freedom even mean? The pressure builds until it explodes into a full-blown parliamentary storm, the Mundra scandal that will rock Nehru's government. LIC officials are grilled. Resignations follow. A commission of inquiry is appointed. For the first time, the mythology of the clean, unblemished Nehruvian state takes a visible blow. Civil servants mutter in corridors that the Express has gone too far. A senior Congress leader, more angry than impressed, tells Ramnath at a reception, "You realize, Goenka-ji, that by printing all this, you are weakening the people's faith in their own government?" Ramnath's reply is dry enough to cut glass. If their faith depends on not knowing, he says, it is already weak. But he can feel the line he has just crossed. He is no longer just the upstart businessman who took on the British and survived. He is now a domestic problem, a man with a press and a taste for exposing Indian power. It wins him readers. It wins him enemies. In the 1960s, as the country stumbles through war with China, food shortages, and political uncertainty, the Indian Express chain becomes the newsroom of frustrations that no one else wants to host. His papers ask why Indian soldiers were sent to the Himalayan front with poor equipment. They question the quiet deals in fertilizer imports, the licenses given to favorite industrialists, the growing distance between the language of socialism and the realities of privilege. In editorial conferences, his senior journalists sometimes plead with him, "You cannot fight every government, sir. We will burn out." He fixes them with the same unforgiving stare he once turned on doubting creditors in Madras. If the government wants praise, he says, let it buy advertisements. All the while, the rivalry with his great North Indian competitor deepens. Circulation numbers are only the obvious layer of the fight. Beneath that runs another, the battle to be the voice minister's fear. When a chief minister's corrupt land deal is uncovered, it is the Express that splashes it across the front page. When a food scandal erupts in a remote state, it is the Express correspondent who sends a blistering dispatch that forces Delhi to respond. In drawing rooms in Lutyens' Delhi, people begin to say it in half-joking, half-nervous tones. If it hasn't appeared in the Express, yet perhaps we can still bury it. Then comes Indira. In 1966, Indira Gandhi becomes prime minister, and Indian politics flips like a coin. To some, she is Nehru's shy daughter, the Gungi Gudia, the dumb doll who will be manipulated by party bosses. To others, she is a quiet volcano waiting to erupt. At first, Ramnath is cautiously hopeful. He has never been sentimental about Nehru. He admires certain things, the man's intellect, his refusal to use police lathis as casually as the British, but he has learned that power, even in Kadi, prefers not to be questioned. Indira, he senses, might be different. She has known humiliation, internal party conspiracies, the condescension of elders who underestimated her. That experience can cut either way. It can make a leader empathetic or ruthless. For a while, the balance holds. Her early years are full of real battles. Food crises, droughts, the 1969 bank nationalization fight, the 1971 war that births Bangladesh. The Indian Express covers her triumphs, critiques her policies, but the relationship is not yet poisonous. The real fracture begins not with policy, but with insecurity. As Indira splits the Congress party, crushes her old rivals, and centralizes power around herself, Ramnath watches the new architecture of authority being built brick by brick. Sycophancy becomes currency. The same rival newspapers that once gently mocked her now print fawning photographs. Indira with children, Indira with soldiers, Indira with harvests. One evening, flipping through a stack of dailies on his desk, Ramnath stops at a particularly obsequious headline. Indira is India, a minister has said. The rival paper has carried it top of the page, almost reverentially. He feels a cold fury, a nation of hundreds of millions, reduced in print to one person. He sends for his Delhi editor. "Remember this line," he says, tapping the paper. "Remember who printed it. One day they will regret it." As Indira's government tightens its grip, the Express sharpens its tone. His papers investigate land grabs by ruling party men, call out political interference in public sector appointments, question the use of income tax raids as tools of intimidation. Slowly, the fight becomes personal. The prime minister is not pleased, a senior bureaucrat tells him in a private meeting, as if delivering weather news. "I am not running a weather report," Ramnath replies. The blows begin to fall. Sudden notices from the tax department, suspicious visits from labor inspectors. Government advertising budgets quietly diverted to more cooperative newspapers, his rivals group chief among them. In boardrooms and press rooms, his men start asking the dangerous question, how long can we go on like this? It is 1974 when the countdown truly starts ticking. Across the country, anger is boiling. Student protests in Gujarat, the Navnirman movement. Strikes in Bihar. Jayaprakash Narayan, the aging socialist who once tutored young congressmen, now calling for total revolution against corruption and authoritarianism. The Indian Express does not stand on the pavement and watch. It jumps into the street. Its reporters travel with student marchers, sleep on station platforms, send back reports that crackle with urgency. Its editorials demand answers. Why are opposition leaders arrested at midnight? Why are peaceful protesters beaten? Why are courts being leaned on to deliver convenient judgments? Indira's advisors read those pages with growing rage. Why must it always be the Express? One of them explodes in a closed meeting. Other papers at least pretend to be objective. Because, another replies darkly, their owner thinks he is bigger than the government. Ramnath knows exactly how small he is, physically. He is no longer young. His heart has given him repeated warnings. sudden pains, breathless episodes that land him in hospital beds under white sheets he hates. Doctors urge him to slow down, to delegate, to let others fight the daily battles. He ignores them. In 1975, as the Allahabad High Court delivers a devastating verdict, invalidating Indira Gandhi's election on charges of electoral malpractice, Delhi is a city of whispers. Will she resign? Will she appeal? Will she declare that the courts have no authority over the people's verdict? For the Indian Express, the moment is electric. Here is the story he always knew would come: the direct collision between a leader's hunger to stay and the rules that say anyone, even a prime minister, must go when found guilty. His rival group hedges, filling its columns with cautious analyses and sympathetic profiles. Ramnath's front pages go for the throat. What is legitimacy? One editorial asks. Is it a majority in parliament or obedience to the law? At night, as he pores over galleys, his doctor's warnings pound in the back of his skull. Friends beg him to travel abroad for treatment, to rest. His family worries that one more shock will stop his heart for good. He shrugs them off. What is the use of a heart that beats safely, he says, if it never has to beat fast? On the evening of June 25, 1975, the war he has been edging toward for years finally bursts open. Rumors slither through Delhi. An emergency may be declared. Opposition leaders may be arrested. Civil liberties may be suspended. At the Indian Express office, telephones ring without pause. Reporters call from police stations, from party offices, from outside bungalows where cars are lined up like nervous animals. Then a brief, chilling message arrives from a trusted bureaucratic source. They will move tonight, the voice says. By midnight at the latest. You have a few hours. After that, censorship, maybe arrests, maybe worse. A few hours. The room seems to tilt for a second. He has been here before, in Madras, racing the sunrise, fighting creditors and colonial agents with only the clock as his ally and enemy. But this is bigger. This is not about one paper dying. This is about whether an entire country wakes up knowing it is no longer free. He calls an urgent conference in the Delhi newsroom. Sub-editors, reporters, printers crowd into the harsh fluorescent light. Sweat glistens on foreheads. Outside, the presses hum, unaware of the history about to be fed into their rollers. We have till midnight, he tells them, to decide what kind of paper we are going to be when they knock on that door. The options are brutal in their simplicity. They can preemptively soften, tone down the front page, avoid the angriest stories, hope that when the censors arrive they will see a responsible paper and look elsewhere for examples. Or they can use the remaining hours like dynamite, print the truth, unvarnished, while they still can. Risk a raid before dawn, the seizure of presses, arrests, closure. Some staff look at the floor. They have families, loans, children in school. He sees their fear and hates that he is the one forcing them to choose between conscience and bread. His heart is hammering so hard he can feel it in his teeth. He picks up the dummy front page for the next morning. The lead story is already bold. On JP's call to the army and police to disobey illegal orders, he makes it bolder. Run it larger, he says. Give it more space. And add this line: the right to protest is not a gift from the state. It is the breath of a free people. The room is dead quiet. A young sub-editor, barely out of college, speaks up, voice shaking. Sir, if they arrest you, what happens to us? To the paper? Ramnath looks at him. This boy who grew up in a country that has always had at least the idea of freedom. You will do what I did, he says softly. You will fight for it again. They go to press. The clatter of type, the smell of ink, the thunder of machines. It all feels suddenly like defiance made metal. Sometime after midnight, even as copies of the paper are flying toward bus stands and news stalls, the power is cut. The presses groan to a halt mid-run. Police jeeps slide through the dark streets. At opposition leaders' homes, doors shudder under the fists of men with lists in their hands. In radio studios, new orders are typed and slipped onto desks. Nothing critical, nothing demoralizing, nothing that questions the proclamation just signed. Emergency. By morning, India wakes into a different kind of day. Trains still run. Milk still arrives. Offices open. But the Constitution's guarantees have been locked in a cupboard. Censorship is now law. The same rival paper that once urged caution prints solemn calls for discipline and unity. At the Indian Express, uniformed censors take their place in the newsroom like new furniture. They sit beside sub-editors, blue pencils ready. They cross out, they question, they warn. Every headline becomes a negotiation. Every paragraph is a risk. His competitor adjusts smoothly, trimming its editorials to the new wind, receiving generous slices of the now tightly controlled state advertising budget. Ramnath refuses to play along. If he cannot tell the whole truth, he will find ways to show its absence. One morning, the Indian Express publishes a stunning protest, a blank editorial space where the lead opinion should have been just white. Readers open their copies and stare. The message is louder than any printed sentence. We wanted to say something here, and we were not allowed. The government fumes. Censors tighten their grip. Officials threaten, hinting at closure, at license cancellations, at personal consequences. Under stress that would break younger, healthier men, Ramnath's body finally rebels. He collapses with chest pain, his family terrified, his doctors furious. In a quiet hospital room, wires taped to his chest, he listens to a cardiologist lecture him. "You cannot fight a government and a heartbeat at the same time, Goenka-ji. One of them will win." He smiles faintly, eyes still burning. "That is why I must make sure," he says, "that the government does not." He signs papers from his hospital bed. He sends messages to his editors through nurses. He dictates instructions between oxygen masks. The rivalry with his great competitor, who has chosen the path of cooperation, now has the starkest contrast it has ever had. One paper grows richer, more secure, more polished. The other grows gaunter, more harassed, and more respected in the shadows. In whispered conversations, in smuggled letters, in prison yards where political detainees trade news like contraband, the Express becomes myth. "Did you see?" Someone will murmur. "They left a space empty again. They are telling us something." The emergency drags on, a long, suffocating night, and then, unexpectedly, comes the twist no one predicted, not even Ramnath. In early 1977, Indira calls elections. Perhaps she believes her own propaganda. Perhaps she thinks the opposition is too broken to fight. Perhaps she has grown tired of ruling by fear. Whatever the reason, she lifts the lid just enough for the country to speak. The Indian Express explodes into that narrow opening. Its reports from the countryside, long muted under censorship, now roar back. Stories of forced sterilization, of slum demolitions, of vanished men and silenced voices. Its editorials, sharpened by 2 years of strangled truth, cut straight through the fog of state media. Voters respond. When the results come, it is like watching a dam break. Indira Gandhi loses her own seat in Raebareli. The Congress is swept out. The Janata Party, a ramshackle alliance of socialists, right-wingers, and rebels, forms the government. In his office, holding the first proof of the historic front page, Ramnath does not cheer. He just exhales, a long breath he has been holding since that midnight call. His rival proprietor, who hedged and compromised, must now adjust to a new power that does not owe him gratitude. Ramnath, whose paper was one of the few that never gave in completely, finds his stature transformed. Ministers who once cursed him now seek his blessing. Activists who read his blank editorials in jail call him the man who kept a light on in the dark. For a rare moment, he allows himself to feel that he has won, not just against a competitor, not just against a government, but against the oldest temptation of all, to bend when bending is safe. Yet even in triumph, he senses another storm gathering. New leaders are sitting in old chairs. New alliances are being struck in the same Delhi drawing rooms. And somewhere in the web of power and ambition, another prime minister is already on the path to believing that her or his will is the nation's will. Ramnath Goenka, heart scarred, body tired, newspapers finally powerful from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, knows that his work is not done. If anything, the real question is just beginning to loom. After you have helped bring down one emergency, what do you do when freedom itself becomes a bargaining chip in the games of those who claim to have restored it? The morning after a dictator falls, the easiest lie to believe is that the story is over. Garlands rot on podiums, slogans fade from walls, and everyone wants to move on. But in the chaotic spring of 1977, while the country celebrates the end of the emergency as if it were a cricket match, India has finally won. Ramnath Goenka is staring at a blank sheet of paper and feeling something close to dread. He knows the one thing more dangerous than an all-powerful government is a government that has just learned it can get away with almost anything. The Janata leaders, freshly sworn in, arrive at his office as if visiting a battlefield general whose artillery saved their army at the last moment. They praise his courage. They recall in reverent detail those empty editorial spaces, those coded headlines, those front pages that refused to lick boots, even when boots were on necks. One of them, a future cabinet minister, actually folds his hands. "You kept democracy alive, Genkaji," he says. "Without you, we might still be in jail." The words should taste sweet. Instead, they alarm him, because praise is only the first step. The second is always assumption. If he helped one set of politicians to power, surely he will now help keep them there. Surely the Indian Express will be the unofficial court newspaper of this restored democracy. He sees the same thought flicker, barely hidden in the smiles of his great rival. The other proprietor moves around the New Delhi with the smoothness of a man who never truly suffered under the emergency. His papers bent when bending was wise, printed the right photographs, used the right adjectives. They were not loved in prison cells, but they were never truly hated in the Prime Minister's office either. Now he, too, is making his rounds, shaking hands with the new ministers, offering editorial support in the name of stability. He and Ramnath cross paths at a reception. The rival's eyes glitter. "You should be happy," he says lightly. "At last we have a government that owes you everything." Ramnath's reply is flat. "That," he says, "is exactly why they will expect too much." For a few months it almost seems he is wrong. Janata ministers talk about press freedom in every speech. Political prisoners are released. Censors vanish from newsrooms like a bad dream. The Constitution is amended to make it harder to declare another emergency. Readers write letters calling the Indian Express a national conscience, an institution, the paper that refused to kneel. But institutions rot not in storms, he knows, but in comfort. The storm comes back faster than expected. It does not arrive as a midnight proclamation this time. It seeps in as complaints. A Janata minister bristles at a report questioning his business interests. A chief minister is furious about an Express story exposing police brutality in his state. A note reaches his desk through friendly channels. "You are making enemies in the new government," it warns. "After all you did for them, they find it ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word makes him laugh, then it makes him angry. What did they think this was? He snaps to an editor. A partnership? The editors are not laughing. They see what he sees, the old impulses resurfacing in new faces. Police still beat protesters, only now in the name of discipline and development. Bureaucrats still demand deference. The machinery of the state remains the same steel, only the paint has changed. The Indian Express continues to prick and prod. It reports on custodial deaths. It carries a chilling series on the Bhagalpur blindings, where police in Bihar pour acid into the eyes of under-trials. The details are so brutal that some readers can't finish the stories. His rival's flagship paper buries the scandal on the inside pages, its tone apologetic, full of alleged and claimed, and sources say. The Express prints the names of victims in bold. "Somewhere," Ramnath says quietly, staring at the photographs of bandaged faces. "This is what happens when the state forgets that people are not property." The new rulers are not amused. Subtler tools are used this time. No mass censorship, no open bans. Instead, tax notices. Parliamentary questions about irresponsible journalism. Whisper campaigns that the Express has become too big for its boots, that its owner thinks he is above accountability. A committee is quietly set up to study press ethics. Its recommendations hint at licensing, at controls, at the idea that freedom too must be regulated for the public good. For the first time, a thought creeps through his own newsroom. Are they pushing too hard? Some senior staff have seen what 1975 did to their families, their friends, their finances. They have built new lives in this fragile post-emergency air. They are not eager to suffocate again. "Sir," one of them tells him gently, "this is not Indira. These are our people. If we don't give them some space, we might help bring them down. And what comes after could be worse." He listens, lips compressed. He thinks of Jayaprakash Narayan, now ailing, who once believed this coalition would rediscover Gandhian ethics in power. He thinks of prisoners who took beatings in jails, believing they were suffering so that such things would never happen again. "You are saying," he answers slowly, "that because they came in the name of freedom, we must give them a discount when they abuse it." He leans forward, voice tightening. If we do that, we will be more dangerous than any censor because we will become our own. Still, the cost of refusal mounts. His heart is a ticking clock now. Doctors are blunter with each attack. Mr. Goenka, this is not heroism, one cardiologist tells him after yet another scare. This is mathematics. You keep adding stress, you subtract years. At this rate, you have maybe 5 good years of full work left. Use them wisely. 5 years. It is the cruelest kind of deadline. Long enough to plan, short enough to feel. He does the maths differently. If he has 5 active years left, how many governments can he still fight? 2, 3? How many press freedom battles can he still throw himself into before his own body declares its emergency? The answer, as it turns out, is exactly as many as history needs. Because just as the Janata experiment collapses under its own contradictions, another threat marches in from a familiar direction. In 1980, Indira Gandhi is back. If the first Indira he faced was uncertain, learning the depths of her own ruthlessness as she went, this one returns with every illusion burned away. She knows now that institutions break if you push hard enough. She has seen what fear can buy. She has watched the cooperative press survive and even prosper. The rival proprietor adapts instantly. His editorials, which had become brave in proportion to Indira's absence, rediscover caution. Words soften. Critique becomes nostalgia. Ramnath responds by going in the opposite direction. He hires a new kind of editor in Delhi. Arun Shourie is not a traditional clubbable figure of the old press. He is intense, impatient, armed with economic training and a missionary streak. He looks at the government not as a source of quotes, but as a suspect to be interrogated. Together, they turn the Indian Express into something resembling a daily insurgency. They go after corruption in high places, the cement scandals, the misuse of official trusts in Maharashtra, questions about favors to friendly businessmen. They investigate not just Congress leaders, but also allies and opponents, state satraps and holy cows. Their weapons are documents, footnotes, obscure circulars pulled out of dusty files and blasted onto page 1. Indira's government responds with the reflex it knows best: pressure by 1,000 cuts, endless defamation suits, summons from privilege committees of parliament, a blizzard of notices from obscure regulatory bodies, each demanding urgent responses within impossible timeframes. 7 days, 3 days, 24 hours. Time, which used to be his ally in breaking stories, now becomes the enemy. 1 month in the early 1980s, there is barely a day when a legal deadline is not looming over the Express management. Reply by Tuesday or face action. Appear in person within 48 hours. Submit explanations within 3 working days. His lawyers put up charts in the office just to keep track. It is like running a newsroom inside a war room. Reporters and accountants share the same anxiety. If one response is late, if one form is filled incorrectly, the paper could lose its license, its printing permissions, its all-important access to newsprint quotas. His rivals group, notably, does not face such storms. They flourish. Government ads bloom in their pages. Footage of their events finds comfortable space on state television. Their proprietors are seen once again at the right dinners, saying the right things about responsible journalism. The contrast does not go unnoticed. In private, some of his own managers whisper inconvenient questions. Sir, we are bleeding money. They are making it. Is it our job to be the eternal martyr? Can we not be moderately critical? Just enough to feel honest, not enough to invite war? He looks older now, the years sitting heavily on his shoulders. But the eyes haven't dimmed. The moment we start calculating just enough truth, he says, we will discover that the calculation never ends, and we will become exactly what we once despised. Yet he is not immune to doubt. There are nights when he lies awake, hand pressed to his own unruly heartbeat, wondering if he has turned his paper into a mirror of his own stubbornness. Then something happens that wipes doubt away like chalk from a board. In Bihar, a new assault on the press begins to take shape, more brazen than most. A state government, smarting from relentless exposure of its misrule, drafts a law that journalists across India will soon know by a simple, furious name, the Bihar Press Bill. It is sold in public as a tool against yellow journalism, a way to protect ordinary citizens from irresponsible reporting. In its clauses, however, lurk wide, terrifying powers. The bill allows the government to confiscate newspapers, jail journalists, and shut down publications on vaguely defined grounds like false or misleading reporting, In other words, a local emergency in legislative clothing. When the draft text reaches his desk, Ramnath reads it twice. By the third reading, his hand is trembling, not from fear, but from the recognition of an old enemy in a new suit. He calls his editors. "We have to kill this," he says simply. "Sir," one responds, "it's only in Bihar. It's a state law. Maybe the courts will strike it down later. Why exhaust ourselves now?" He points at the pages. "Today, Bihar," he says. "Tomorrow, Delhi. The day after, the whole country. You don't wait for a forest fire to reach the capital city before you pick up water. There is another practical problem. The bill is moving fast. Committees have already nodded. The state assembly is a rubber stamp. In weeks, not months, it could be law. Once that happens, every reporter in Bihar who writes for the Indian Express could be one hostile inspector away from prison. The time limit is suffocating. He mobilizes the only weapon that has ever truly been his: outrage multiplied by ink. Day after day, the Express publishes front-page stories, blistering editorials, interviews with lawyers, statements from writers and activists. He offers space to rival editors, even those who dislike him, to speak against the bill. "The day they gag one of us," he says, "all of us are wearing the same rope." Reporters crisscross states, covering protests, bar association resolutions, student marches. They frame the bill not as a regional issue but as a national dress rehearsal for the next emergency. His great competitor, initially cautious, is forced by the rising noise to take a position. Their editorial, when it comes, is mild, full of negations. "We do not believe such powers are necessary at this time," it says. At this time. He almost tears the page in half when he reads it. "They are saying," he snaps, "that there may be a time." His own editorials are sharper, more personal. "What is a free press worth?" one demands, "if it can be turned into a license system at the whim of a chief minister?" This bill does not punish lies. It rewards fear. Under the sheer weight of national attention, something astonishing happens. Members of parliament in Delhi begin to murmur against the Bihar law, fearing its stink will cling to their own parties. Legal luminaries warn that the Supreme Court may strike it down. The Bihar government, which expected to bulldoze the bill through a few days of local protest, finds itself on the front pages from Madras to Bombay. At last, pressured from above and below, it blinks. The Bihar press bill is withdrawn. In the Express newsroom, the tension breaks into rare, spontaneous applause. Ramnath, standing in a corner, feels his chest tighten, not with pain this time, but with the reckless joy of knowing that, for once, they have stopped a gag before it wrapped around anyone's throat. But the victory comes with a brutal reminder. Each of these fights is costing him. Shortly after, another heart attack slams him down. This time the doctors are merciless. "Mr. Goenka, you are running your body like you run your newspaper," one says. "Always on deadline, always in overdrive. You have to accept this. Any one of these episodes could be the last." He hears the sentence that follows as if from underwater. "If you want to be alive to see what happens to the institution you built, you must start letting go now." Letting go. Two words he has never enjoyed. He tries in his own ragged way. He begins transferring more formal control to trusts, to family members, to senior executives. He experiments with stepping back from daily editorial decisions, only to lunge forward again whenever he smells a story being blunted for convenience. His relationship with his chosen firebrand editor, Arun Shourie, becomes a drama of its own. They are allies in war, but not always in peace. Shourie's crusading style wins the paper admirers and more enemies. His pieces savage not just governments, but also judges, businessmen, even respected icons. He treats no one as sacred, including those Ramnath privately respects. Pressure builds from all sides. Politicians call, ostensibly out of concern. "Goenka-ji, your editor is out of control," one says. "He is damaging even good people. Do you want the Express to become a pamphlet for one man's obsessions?" Even some old friends in the press shake their heads. "You created a monster," a veteran editor from another group tells him. People now think journalism means daily execution. The state predictably sharpens its knives. Tax raids, more cases. Whispers that government contracts may bypass any company linked to him. The rival group again plays it safer. Their pages are critical, yes, but in doses, in calibrated bursts. They are not making enemies across the entire establishment at once. Ramnath finds himself caught in a personal paradox. He has always demanded editors with spine, unwilling to be his stenographers. But he is also a proprietor with strong ideas about what battles are worth the gunpowder. At one point in the mid-1980s, under a particularly vicious combination of health scares, financial strain, and political fire, the tension snaps. He removes Shourie from the editor's chair. The shock reverberates through India's intellectual circles. Had the warrior of the emergency finally folded under pressure? Had the same man who once left editorial spaces blank now blinked in the face of too much truth from his own pages? In drawing rooms, his rival smiles faintly. Even Goenka has his limits, people say. The gossip hurts more than any tax raid. In private, he rages at circumstances, at his own judgment, at the bitter fact that a man fighting to preserve an institution may sometimes find himself damaging its spirit. Yet the saga is not so simple. Shourie, though removed, is not entirely exiled. The relationship between them continues in strange, flickering forms. Invites, rejections, reconciliations, renewed distances. It is as if two men, both addicted to battle, cannot quite decide whether they are comrades or competitors. Even as that personal drama unfolds, the stage of national politics shifts again. Indira is assassinated in 1984. Rajiv Gandhi, young, seemingly modern, walks into office on a wave of grief and hope. For a brief season, much of the country wants to believe that this time power will be different. Computers arrive. Telecom reforms are whispered. Air India gets snappier advertising. The rival group falls almost in love with the new prime minister. Front pages puff his foreign visits. Profiles linger on his charm, his sweaters, his children. For a while, even the Indian Express softens, watching, waiting. Then the old pattern reasserts itself. Under Rajiv, too, the temptations of control prove irresistible. When investigative stories about defense deals surface, when questions about middlemen and commissions are raised, the reflex is not to answer but to attack the messenger. Some of the fiercest early questions about the atmosphere of corruption around the Bofors scandal, about the sudden wealth of politically connected businessmen appear in the Express. The retaliation is surgical. Not mass arrests, not overt censorship. Instead, more targeted financial strangulation, withholding government ads, starving government-controlled institutions of permission to advertise in his papers, encouraging state-owned companies to divert not only advertisements but also loan considerations away from anything stamped Express. It is a quieter siege, but no less deadly. By now, Ramnath is an old man in visible decline. In corridors, younger journalists lower their voices when he passes. Some have never seen him in his full volcanic prime. To them, he is almost a legend wandering in his own myth. He walks slower. He forgets names sometimes. But when he sits in an editorial meeting and someone suggests toning down a headline to avoid unnecessary trouble, the old fire flares. "Do you think," he asks, "that I built all this for peace?" Peace, anyway, is no longer an option. On another front, he finds himself in a fight he did not entirely anticipate, with big business. Reliance Industries, the rising behemoth of the 1980s, becomes entangled in regulatory controversies, licenses, quotas, alleged favors. The Indian Express digs. Stories appear questioning the nexus between boardrooms and ministries, hinting that a new kind of power has arrived in India. One that is not political in name but can bend politics at will. Suddenly, the enemy is not just the state, but also private capital with a taste for vengeance. Smear campaigns target him. Friendly papers, some in his competitor's stable, some elsewhere, run pieces suggesting that the Express is driven by personal vendettas, on that its owner is jealous of other people's success. He is painted as a bitter old man who cannot understand the new India of stock markets and glossy annual reports. He answers the only way he knows, by asking for more documents, more proof. Follow the licenses, he tells his reporters. Follow the clearances. If I am wrong, the facts will deny me. If I am right, they will attack harder. They do. The combined pressure of government displeasure, corporate fury, legal harassment, and financial strain begins to bend even steel. Inside the Express empire, cracks widen. Family members disagree about strategy, about succession, about which battles are still worth fighting. Old associates peel away, muttering that the patriarch no longer knows when to stop. His rival group, by contrast, sails into the late 1980s like a well-insured liner, criticizing here and there, but never enough to be truly endangered. It is the final cruel twist of his rivalry. He has won the moral war in the eyes of history, but in the quarterly reports of advertising revenue, in the comforting charts of market share, the rival often looks better. That, after all, was always the wager. He had never promised his shareholders comfort. By 1990, his body is a map of battles: scarred heart, fragile lungs, a mind that still races ahead of the flesh carrying it. The Berlin Wall has fallen. Satellites beam foreign news into Indian homes. A new world is cracking open. He senses that the press wars of the future will be fought with weapons he never knew: private television, corporate ownership beyond, printing presses, software more powerful than linotype. He will not live in that world. He knows it. In a quiet moment, in his modest room, he speaks with a close associate about the future. "What is it that you want remembered?" The man asks gently. "That you fought Indira? That you fought censorship? That you built a chain of papers from nothing?" Ramnath thinks for a long time. "I want it remembered," he says at last, "that when it was profitable to be afraid, we were not. That is all." In October 1991, after decades of pushing his heart like a reluctant laborer up one hill after another, the organ finally refuses. He dies in New Delhi, far from the alleys of Madras where he first bargained for a second-hand press, far from the cramped compartments, where he once convinced cautious men to invest in news they did not yet believe in. The news of his death crosses the same wire services that once carried his exposés. In offices across India, editors who once cursed his stubbornness write editorials praising his courage. Some of his fiercest critics call him the last great press baron of the independence generation. In the newsroom of the Indian Express, machines do not stop. Even as staff file past his photograph, garlanded and too still for anyone who remembers the way he used to slam a table, the next day's edition is being built, headline by headline, comma by comma. Years later, the empire he built will fracture, divided between branches of the family. The northern editions will keep the old name. The southern papers will sail under a slightly altered flag. New owners will come, new editors, new rivals with digital arsenals. But in almost every Indian newsroom, when a young reporter files a story that could anger a minister, when a nervous manager suggests softening a line, an older voice somewhere will say, "Remember Goenka. If he could stare down an emergency with a failing heart, we can survive one angry phone call." And somewhere in a frame on a wall, a small man with intense eyes seems to be watching, still holding that invisible stopwatch he always raced against, measuring not just deadlines, not just governments, but the one question that haunted him from the day Nehru died to the day he himself did. How long can a free press stay free, if it ever starts believing that its real business is anything other than saying what power does not want to hear?